Sigil. Here's a question that should make a mark. Why do people read you before you speak? Not notice. Read. The moment you walk into a room, the moment you cross a street, the moment you approach a counter, you are being read. Your body is broadcasting information that triggers assumptions, classifications, consequences, all before you open your mouth. For Black people, this isn't metaphor. This is daily reality. That's sigil. Sigil is compressed, meaning made visible. Sigil is the African civilizational technology through which meaning was compressed into visible form so that law, memory, power, warning, and belonging could be recognized and enforced without speech. Sigil is not decoration. It's not tribal symbolism. It's functional visual encoding, a parallel intelligence system that operated alongside speech and writing to ensure knowledge survived disruption. Where writing could be burned and speech could be outlawed, sigils endured. They marked territory without walls, declared sovereignty without text, invoked protection without explanation, transmitted law without archives. Sigil required only recognition. The 4 operational levels. I. Sigil as mark. Cosmograms mapped cosmic order and social structure. Nsibidi encoded law, diplomacy, ethics, designed to be illegible to outsiders as information security. Adinkra symbols compressed ethical and cosmological instruction into geometry. Uli markings on bodies and walls encoded status, lineage, transition. Boundary marks demarcated territory and sacred zones. These marks didn't describe meaning. They activated it. A sigil didn't tell you what to do. It told you what would happen. 2. Sigil as environment. African civilizations embedded sigils into space itself. Sacred groves, forbidden zones, shrine placement, city layouts, architectural orientation, thresholds, entrances, exclusions. Space functioned as instruction. Where you could walk, where you couldn't, where silence was required, where consequence resided. Nothing was neutral. Everything was readable. This is sigil as spatial governance. Law embedded in environment rather than written in statute. Tretji, sigil as body. The body itself functioned as a broadcasting surface. Scarification inscribed lineage, ritual status, historical memory into skin. Body paint signaled transition, protection, readiness. Hairstyling systems, architecture of the head as social positioning, dress codes and adornment, textiles, beads, metals as readable information. Posture, gesture, gait, embodied communication before speech. These weren't expressions of individual identity. They were broadcasts of status, role, protection, transition. The body carried readable information without speech. No archive needed. When enslavement stripped Africans of objects, texts, institutions, the body remained. Sigil logic migrated into hair patterns, dress, dance, gestural languages that survived across the Atlantic. 4. Sigil as phenotype. The colonial inversion. This is the most uncomfortable level, and the most necessary. Once racial capitalism installed blackness as a global classificatory system, skin itself became a sigil, not chosen, but imposed. Black skin is not metaphorically a sigil. It is a sigil. A sigil is compressed, meaning that travels without language, triggers recognition, encodes history. survives rupture, activates consequence. Black skin does all of this automatically. What black skin encodes? Geographic memory, melanin maps, sunlight, latitude, climate, ancient migration routes, survival technology, protection against UV radiation, folate depletion, certain cancers. Historical index, presence of black skin anywhere tells a story of trade, enslavement, displacement, resistance, survival. Political trigger. Black skin activates systems before speech occurs. In pre-colonial African contexts, skin tone existed without hierarchical encoding. Variation was ecological and ancestral, not moralized. Colonialism introduced a toxic sigil mutation, colorism. Shade became hierarchy. Lighter skin signaled proximity to power. Darker skin signaled disposability. This visual grammar persists in employment outcomes, policing, media representation, intra-black hierarchies, global beauty markets. The melanin paradox. The same melanin used to justify enslavement is now studied for radioprotection, explored for neuroprotection, examined for anti-aging properties, researched for space travel shielding. The future is circling back to the biology it once tried to annihilate. Sigil and mythology, the source code. Sigils don't originate in aesthetics. They originate in mythology. In African systems, mythology wasn't a story layer added after meaning. It was the source layer from which meaning was compressed. Sigil is mythology collapsed into form. Where mythology unfolds law through narrative, genealogy, cosmology, consequence, sigil performs the inverse. It condenses those same laws into geometry, mark, pattern, placement. This is why sigils work even when the story is no longer spoken. They are myth after compression. When mythology was attacked, outlawed as paganism, stripped from curricula, mocked as superstition, sigil became the last carrier. A shape could pass where a story could not. A mark could remain where a name was erased. A geometry could survive where language was broken. Sigil is what mythology leaves behind when it must travel quietly. Sigil is still operating right now. Sigil didn't disappear, it transformed. Modern power operates through visual compression. Flags and insignia, uniforms and badges, borders and passports, logos and brands, interface icons, biometric markers, algorithmic classifications. These are all sigils, compressed meaning designed for instant recognition and enforcement. Visual policing and racialized surveillance. Policing relies on sigil logic. Uniforms project authority visually before legal justification is invoked. Simultaneously, black bodies are read through a counter-sigil, presumed threat. This produces stop-and-search disparities, disproportionate use of force, criminalization without evidence. Sigil clarifies why reforms focused on training or bias awareness fail. The system doesn't operate at the level of belief. It operates at the level of visual trigger. AI, biometrics, and algorithmic sigils. Contemporary technologies increasingly rely on visual classification. Facial recognition systems, biometric databases, predictive surveillance, algorithmic risk scoring. These systems read bodies as data, digital sigils. They misidentify darker skin at higher rates, encode racial bias as statistical normality, scale discrimination globally under guise of neutrality. What's presented as technical error is, in fact, sigil inheritance. Algorithms are trained on worlds already structured by racialized visual reading. African sigil systems were bounded by cosmology, ethics, communal accountability. Algorithmic sigils are not. What sigil explains for Black people. Sigil explains why Black people instinctively understand things others have to be taught. Why clothing choices aren't just fashion, they're legibility management. Why hair isn't just style, it's identity architecture. Why certain gestures, postures, silences carry weight and consequence. Why you know who's safe and who isn't before a word is exchanged. Why how you're seen determines what happens to you. In stores, streets, borders, algorithms. That knowledge didn't come from nowhere. It came from centuries of needing to compress meaning into the body because everything else could be taken. Why this matters. For Black people, this is not theory. This is the logic of daily navigation. How you dress, move, speak, or remain silent are not neutral choices. They are sigil management. The body broadcasts before the mouth opens. The skin triggers systems before identity is claimed. Sigil explains why African knowledge survived when everything else was taken. Why Black people remain legible to each other across oceans and centuries. Why, in a world governed by visual recognition systems, those who carry Black bodies must understand how they are seen, or remain vulnerable to systems designed to read them as threat, resource, or problem. The core truth. Sigil is not metaphor. It's not folklore. It's not decoration. Sigil is how civilization remained readable when everything else was broken. African civilizations anticipated rupture and designed for survivability. They encoded knowledge across multiple layers simultaneously. They governed through systems, not improvisation. And that architecture is still operating on Black bodies, in surveillance systems, in algorithms, in policing, in how people are read and sorted every single day. Understanding sigil means understanding how visual systems operate. And if you can't name how they work, you remain subject to them. This page exists so Black people can name what they already know. And so everyone else understands. Sigil is structural. And those who live inside it have been reading the world this way all along. This work is part of the BRIDGEWORKS, an original civilizational framework developed by Chinenye Egbuna Ikwuemesi within Afrodeities, a restorative and corrective project making pre-colonial African history legible while teaching the same encoded knowledge, cultures, and practices across the diaspora. The goal is to demonstrate the power and sophistication of African civilizational architecture, how knowledge was archived, transmitted, and preserved across time and rupture. Afrodeities exists to prove that African memory systems were not primitive. They were engineered for survival. And they worked.